Today we're talking about SmiteGuru score and how it essentially became useless for many people in Season 4 and what broke the system, so to speak. Now, looking back at previous seasons, Season 3 and before that, SmiteGuru score was never really accurate. It did give you a decent representation of players when it came to ranked, where that system had its individual score, because you would be able to figure out roughly where you are placed if you played enough matches, and Hyris pretty much confirmed this a few times, saying that if you have more than 100 matches, then your SmiteGuru score will be somewhat accurate. However, the same was not true for casual modes. In casual modes, the score was combined between all game modes, which meant that it was really hard to actually get any value out of that number. Now, obviously, if you were to compare a player with a 3000 SmiteGuru score to a player with 1000 SmiteGuru score, you would be able to tell that the player with 3000 SmiteGuru score would be the better player. There was an obvious gap where you would be able to tell, okay, this guy is most likely better when if you're talking about differences from maybe 1000 elo or less than that, but roughly at least 500. Yet the value didn't tell you all too much, and it was relatively easy to manipulate as long as the players did play more than one mode, or essentially more than just Conquest. For example, there were a lot of players who would just 4-man a pre-made queue into the modes that were less populated, like 3v3 or especially into Siege. And in that mode, you would often be matched against single players with no coordination, simply because there weren't enough players for that mode. And because of that, you would just stump the opposition, get a lot of wins, very few losses, and therefore could inflate your elo. That's nothing new, that's nothing special, and as such, the value had always to be treated with a decent amount of, well, skepticism, but it could be used and it could tell you a little bit. With Season 4, the whole system was overhauled and there were good intentions behind it. Instead of looking at every mode combined in the casual ratings, the modes would be looked at separately and you would have an individual rating for every mode. So good so far, because that exactly solved the issue that SmiteGuru score had before by being mixed throughout different game modes, not really being representative of anything, whereas Hyris system would always give you different ratings depending on your game mode. So somebody could be really bad in Arena and get matched with really bad Arena players because of that, and at the same time be really good in Conquest and get matched with really good Conquest players because of that. So the goal here was to better reflect Hyris system, and that I think was a really smart idea. There was already collected data from the previous season that would have allowed them to work on that, but maybe the data wasn't complete enough. So there was a decision that was made that basically made the whole value of these scores pretty worthless, unfortunately. What should have happened should have been some sort of factoring in previous seasons and how the ratings or the win rates in different modes were there. That didn't happen. All SmiteGuru score ratings for the different modes were set to 1500 elo. And because of that, they essentially have no value for almost all player groups. And here's why. Because you already had a different rating from 1500 elo beforehand from the previous season, and casual modes did not see a rating reset at all. All ratings, all rankings, the whole matchmaking system stayed as it was in the previous season. There is now no way to find out what your actual score is. If you were already at 3000 elo last season in casual Conquest, then you will now stand at 1500 elo. And obviously, you won't get that many wins at 3000 elo because you're gonna get matched against people of high elo, and the system is supposed to place you against equal opponents, so it's gonna be hard to just get a ridiculous win rate that will allow you to grind much further than that, because there is not much more above it. So let's say you were at 3000 elo and you would play 40 games, win 20 and lose 20 of those. In the statistics of the SmiteGuru score, you would now still stand at 1500 elo, a little more, a little less, depending on how much you get per win or loss. But you would not be anywhere close to your actual elo at all, and you would have no way of telling. And this is true for almost every player. There are two exceptions. One exception is a player that is not level 30 yet, or has really not played the game much, maybe like someone below level 10. Because then if you level up, you will get a lot of extra elo for the games that you play, because you're most likely still around 1500 elo if you haven't played many games. So in the end, it will not be 100% accurate for you, but it will be close to accurate. The other option is that you actually had 1500 elo beforehand in that very mode. Now, this is something you wouldn't really know. It's honestly very unlikely for many people to happen. It could theoretically be the case, but once again, you wouldn't have any way of knowing, because there is no way to know your SmiteGuru score from previous seasons. So in the end, even if you fall into this group, you wouldn't even have any idea that you do. That also means that if you're decent at the game and you create a new account now that you haven't played on before and play that account, it will most likely get a much higher elo than your actual account. Because on the new account, it will be much easier to get more wins as you're starting from the start elo and you have very easy opponents at first. So maybe that account would end up at 3000 elo, whereas with your other account you will slowly grind up maybe to 2000 elo if you're good and you get a lot of wins. This essentially means that any pre-level 30 player that levels up in this season will end up with much higher rankings compared to players that were playing in the last season and already had a standing and just started again in Season 4 from that reset standing. So the reset value basically makes SmiteGuru score useless forever. And it even applies to the main score, to your overall score, which we have, where you would be able to see, well, your SmiteGuru score combined for all modes. But because that also got reset, even this value will not tell us anything anymore. The only scores that at this point still have value are the scores for ranked. Because ranked actually got reset, resetting the scores there made perfect sense, and because of that the score may not be 100% accurate, but it will be as close as possible to that. However, these values most likely won't remain reliable for very long either, simply because with the next season split, we will already see a soft reset of your elo, and I don't think there will be any way for SmiteGuru to find out where the soft reset will place players, so in the end that value will be useless a bit down the road as well. And as such, you really have no accurate way of telling what place a player should roughly be and how good he should roughly be based on any SmiteGuru stats anymore that relate to the elo or however they want to call it. If you want to go off win rate instead, things seem to be a bit weird as well. I mean, the overall win rate within the season is something you can look at and see how a player performed, but once again, you have no way of telling on which level of play he got his wins and his losses. And there are these rankings, the percentage ranking and the overall rank that you're given here in Ranked Duel and Joust we can look at. But unfortunately, those don't really make sense. As you can see here, I've played in neither of the modes, and I have 1500 elo in both of them because of that. But according to these numbers, I am in the bottom 61% of Ranked Duel and the top 28% of Ranked Joust. That doesn't make any sense because I've never played it. And what I think is that all players that have the same elo, have the 1500 elo, get placed randomly in an order in this ranking. So most likely the player with 10,000, ranking 10,000 will still have 1500 elo, and the player with like rank 50,000 would still have the same elo as well. And that will skew the curve for anyone, because really the good players, or the players that actually play the good mode and win a few times, should be easily in the top 5% all of a sudden, I guess. Whereas the worst players that lose a lot would end up in the very low percentage very, very quickly. Because in between there's a massive amount of players with 1500 elo who actually just don't play the mode. I don't know if that's the case, but that's the only logical explanation I have as to how these weird numbers came to pass. And if that's the case, then it's really hard to actually get any value out of those numbers as well. Likewise, there are those Q scores, which I think look interesting at first, because they could be informative, but once again they seem to factor in every player that doesn't actually play the mode at all. I am in the top 0.01% for wins, which absolutely makes no sense, and the same for minutes, which I guess is the playtime. So I guess everyone who has never played Conquest is just factored in there, and that pushes anyone who plays the mode a little bit into these top percentages right away, because any other player is just in there for no reason. But Again, I don't know how this is calculated. There is no information, no further details on it. It just seems really, really weird, and there's really hard to read anything out of the statistics when anything that you do just pushes you up into the top percentiles, and there's not much background to what it is. The FAQ makes no mention of how all this information is gathered, and that really takes away from the value in that regard as well. I think overall this is quite unfortunate, because I think that SmiteGuru is a great tool to just look at things that you can improve on, for example on specific guards and so on, but it would be much better if all those stats actually had some weight and you would actually be able to compare your performance to the average player of specific modes, for example, and see where you're better and where you're worse, which I think is the intention of all that is there, but some stats just don't really add up at all. With that, I hope I clarified why SmiteGuru score makes so little sense now, and many other information tools on the website are somewhat, well, pointless as well. I really hope that something will be done about this. Unfortunately, I think many things can no longer be fixed, especially with those casual scores being reset. With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click that button. SLOTH, out.